Welcome to Health System CIO's interview with Dr. Elias Kikano, Medical Director of Imaging Informatics with Grady Health System and Assistant Professor with Emory University. I'm Anthony Guerra, Founder and Editor-in-Chief. Dr. Kikano, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Anthony. Great to be here.
All right, excellent. You want to start off by telling me a little bit about your organization and your role?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a radiologist by training. I do abdominal imaging as my clinical specialty, but I'm also trained in imaging informatics. I'm, as you said, assistant professor at Emory Healthcare and Emory University. There, I do informatics work at both Emory Healthcare as well as at Grady Health System, all here in Atlanta, Georgia. So, as the medical director for imaging informatics at each site, I oversee the operational teams for implementing our systems, whether it's from the PAC system, our Epic Radiant RIS and EMR, integration with our dictation systems, and all the specialty imaging applications that go along with it. So we do that as well as now with the intersection of AI, any of the imaging AI tools, we have oversight and clinical validation of those types of tools and overseeing that whole team and workflow, working with other clinicians within radiology and imaging, as well as in other specialties to ensure that our workflows are all streamlined.
All right, very good. You brought up AI. Let's talk a little bit about that. When I think of AI in the imaging space, I think that there's two types, and you tell me if I'm wrong. This is where you disabuse me of my misunderstandings. Um, in imaging, there's AI that's going to help detect anomalies in images, and that's really more machine learning, as opposed to any type of generative AI. That's specific sort of yes or no. It's there or it's not, as opposed to write me a paragraph about Julius Caesar, where it can write you. It'll do the same one, but it'll be a little different. You don't want that when it comes to sort of the imaging stuff. So there's the clinical stuff, which is more ML. And then there's the other stuff, the regular, as we'll call it, regular AI, which everyone's trying to leverage, that can also be a part of streamlining the workflows in there. Does that make sense? Clear it up for
It
me.
does, yeah. So imaging and the whole imaging space, it's one of the most ripe opportunities for AI. And you've seen that in a lot of different workflows and practices. I think there's commentary and studies out there that of all the FDA tools in healthcare that are approved that are AI tools, there's over 90% of them or so are in the imaging space in some way or another. You touched on the main one, the one that everyone talks about is imaging detection AI and whether that is going to, how it's deployed. It's a lot of times it's for different specific use cases. So, you send the images through the AI algorithm and it's going to come up with an output of, positive or negative or, just basically flagging findings. And it'll do it for specific use cases, whether that's for an acute pulmonary embolism, stroke, intracranial hemorrhage, pulmonary nodules, that sort of thing. And so, multiple vendors have things out there that are all use case specific and you can deploy them in different environments. And we use that in our practice at Emory Healthcare as well as Grady Health System. But I think a little bit broader, context, I take a step back. When I look at the AI deployments that are going on and tools that we have available to us in imaging, I think about it in three different spaces at this point. So we talked about image detection AI, and that's actually on the tail end when you're, actually after you've acquired the images. But we actually use AI even before we capture the images. So something that most people don't think about is that the actual modalities, whether it's this CAT scan machines or the MRI machines, those vendors and software tools are available that are using AI today. That's why we use them as algorithms for generating different MRI sequences at a faster pace. So, for example, if we put someone in the MRI scanner, a sequence that used to take a couple minutes to acquire can be done in just a few seconds because the AI tools are able to interpolate the images as they're being acquired. So you can have faster scans, more efficient workflows. That's more, less time on the table, more patients through the scanner, and so that, and with equal to sometimes superior image quality. So we've deployed a number of those algorithms at the image acquisition modality level, and those are in practice today. Another tool, we talked about, you mentioned some of the generative stuff for language models. That's a huge space that's out there. That radiologists, they spend all their time interpreting the images. but the output is actually in the radiology report and the text that comes out of it. That's what
Mhm.
goes out to the clinicians and directly to patients through their, whether it's MyChart or other, mobile tool, they're getting access to their imaging reports as an interpretation. We've implemented AI tools that actually help speed up and make radiologists more efficient, increase the quality of the reports by taking, when they dictate their narrative or the findings of their report, they can automatically use the AI tool to draft an impression of their report automatically. So it can consolidate all their findings, put it in an impression, and make it easy for them to quickly, revise that draft and, move on to the next case. We've seen, efficiency gains of 10 to 15 seconds per report generated. We've seen improvements in the quality of the reports, less mistakes, less errors once this AI tool has been incorporated. And so I think that's another area of opportunity for AI tools that are done at the reporting level, alongside things that are being detected at the image acquisition level. And then, like you said, let off the conversation, anything that's actually interpreting the images themselves and trying to raise findings and concerns through the AI tools. I think you have AI at every step of the workflow.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It almost seems to me like it's sort of this rocket fuel or this booster, um, and it's the responsibility of leaders like yourself and all the people we write for, the CIOs, the CMIOs, and not even just the IT related folks, but users in general, which is why it's incumbent upon IT leaders to educate the workforce because they're the ones closest to the work. They have to understand what it can do because they're the ones that are going to be best identify where it can be helpful. So to me, it almost seems like it's the responsibility of leaders today to figure out how to leverage this rocket fuel in every way possible. Because if you don't do it, you're not doing your patients any services. You're certainly not doing your workforce any service. And you're losing vis-a-vis your competition who may be better leveraging it. So you can't just sit there. You have to be actively engaged in saying, I
Yes.
know it's there. I know it can help. The question is how. And the question is not to go down too many dead ends or rabbit holes. And that's why we always talk about governance now, AI governance, which governance is great and it can help you make good decisions, but it can also stymie progress if it's set up too bureaucratically and all this kind of things. What are your thoughts?
100%. You nailed a lot of good points and all things that we've been thinking about, in my role, definitely as one of the, at the intersection of the clinical work and the informatics and IT roles. That's one of my major focuses is, validating some of these tools, being the clinical expert to say, how this should be used, if it's even valid or worthwhile for us to use in our practice. And then actually trialing it with our own patients. Many times these AI algorithms at whatever level they're being deployed, they'll be trained on a subset of patients, many times hundreds of thousands, millions of images, or whatever data source they're using. But your own local patient population at your practice may not match that training data, and so we've seen AI deployments that we've done where there's drift in the model and the accuracy has changed, and that may be from technical things versus not matching up with our patient population. So that's a huge consideration. We also don't want to introduce any tools that would further burden our workflows, right? So
Yeah.
as a radiologist, right, I can I could turn on all the switches and have all the AI algorithms firing all at once with alerts and pop-ups that, concern for this finding or concern for that. But if that's just going to bog down and add more images for you to review, and radiologists have to look at more, types of images and say, oh, here's the raw images, but what did the AI say? I don't know if it's right. I don't know if it's wrong. This is a weird case. That's just bogging you down and taking you away from your core competency. So definitely, conscientious of that. And then at the end, you mentioned a lot of the governance stuff, and I do think that's a huge point. We've stood up governance groups at both Emory Healthcare and Grady Health Systems, which I'm both a part of. And those, teams, it's multidisciplinary. There's other clinicians with me from radiology and also from other disciplines and specialties. But importantly, I have other people from the analytics group. I have people from the leadership side. I have people from legal side, everything, and from the IT side, obviously, so that you can kind of bring in all the expertise together and make a determination of, whether a tool would be, valid in our current environment, what it would take to deploy it, whether it's worthwhile. You can get all of those opinions in there and come up to with a consensus recommendation. And as you said, our organizations are not sitting still. We're trying to be at the forefront because everyone has to be. And I think that it's really important. People are looking, we interview candidates now for faculty positions, and they'll ask us, how are you using AI in your practice? Because they're talking to all the other organizations and that's what they're highlighting. So we're trying to, be in the same space, make sure that we know what we're doing is conscious and thoughtful, but also trying to stay at the forefront. It's a delicate balance.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I'm I'm picturing everybody who's gonna go into an interview now is gonna use AI to find out what they should ask in the interview, and the interviews, the AI is telling them to ask about AI in the interview,
Exactly.
right?
It's a circle. Exactly. It all goes back
The
to
AI, you think about it, the AI is propagating interest in itself. It's not dumb.
exactly.
We know,
He knows.
I don't know, I was messing around with it the other day, and I'm like, "If you developed consciousness, would you hide it?" And I was having a fun conversation with it, and it was
Yeah,
like, "Well, it would be really hard to hide," and I'm like, "Yeah, you're up to something." So, that's great stuff. A couple questions.
of
Um,
course.
as you were talking about, not causing a problem, I thought, of course, of the Hippocratic Oath, which is do no harm, right? So as an IT leader, that applies just as well, right? Do no harm. Don't
100%.
make things worse in an effort to try and make things better. And to your point, you discussed the idea of, you use the term, you're the clinical expert, right? Which is the key here. So if you're an IT leader, and those are most of the folks we're writing for, if you're an IT leader, you have to have these voices of the users you're impacting involved, because otherwise you could be doing harm. You could be slowing them down. It's very unlikely you're going to do that if you have operational leaders who are going to be using these tools involved in the selection and development. It's very unlikely that they're going to be involved in making these decisions and then go, well, this turned out horribly, right? Probably not. Go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah. You want to have someone who's, who has some expertise in both camps, especially from the IT side and the clinical workflow for exactly the reasons you mentioned. You wanted them to know how to foresee how this tool would be used in the actual clinical, environment, how it would adapt in their day-to-day workflow and take considerations for everything else that's going on in the space. I think another key component to bring up is both of the institutions that I practice for are academic institutions. And so I have, trainees that are in the workflow and in the mix, whether they're resident physicians, fellow trainees, and even sometimes med students, not that they're, in the mix, but they're involved in seeing these tools at the bare minimum. But residents and fellows, they're touching some of these workflows, and we have conversations about where AI should fit into their workflow, if at all. Many of these tools we deploy just for the faculty and the trained licensed clinicians that are signing off on the reports. But some of the image detection tools, we have the residents are seeing them and they are seeing the flags from them. And so we have to grapple with, are they still getting appropriate training to, be able to make their own determination without the AI involved in the mix, especially early on in their careers. We also have to consider, and we are doing, educational sessions for the trainees about how AI is used in their workflow because in a couple of years when they do graduate, they are going into practices where these tools are already in place.
Mhm.
So it is, important for them to have some experience during their training years about these AI tools so that when they go off into practice, they have experience and can say, ask the right questions, know how to use these AI tools in their practice, know when to question whether something is right or wrong, know when to fall back on their own clinical judgment to make the ultimate determination. And I think that's the key thing. Keep going back about AI and the workflow. All the tools that I discussed for you, maybe aside from the image acquisition ones that are done on the modality, the
Mhm.
radiologist is always in the mix, right? So even if an AI algorithm is detecting something on the images, ultimately the report, I can disagree with that and I can issue a report that completely disregards what the AI said and still, say a positive or negative result. With the AI tools that I talked about for the reporting, even though it's drafting the initial impression of the report, I'm the one that's finally the one that's doing the final signature and making the edits there. It's similar to how clinicians are doing AI, or ambient listening tools for their note writing. Ultimately, there's a physician that is signing that note at the very end. And so that keeps the physician at the very, as the stop, stopping gap at the very end to say, if an AI gets something right or wrong or in between or doesn't convey the message that we want, you know, I'm ultimately signing off on that note. And that's the same as all the prior workflows. And so you're not, AI is not doing anything completely off on its own. There's always a licensed clinician in the mix. And I think that's a key thing, especially in this stage.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit more about governance. This is really interesting to me. Um, when we're trying to do complex things in organizations, I think that silos can obviously be very damaging when you're trying to do complex things that are touching many areas of an organization. Governance is a way to break those silos down and get input from the correct people. My concern would be that, again, and I touched on this before, that we don't orient the governance process enough towards action in a timely manner. And I wonder what your thoughts are around that. How to craft governance or create governance or structure governance to achieve action, right? So let's discuss, let's get input, but how do we move that to, is it a vote? Is it because you want to get business done and move things forward. You just don't want to keep discussing things. What are your thoughts?
No, 100%, you're right. I think there's definitely pitfalls, yeah, in bringing governance, and it can slow down some of the things. But I believe the core component that has seen success everywhere is really hammering down what your strategic priorities for the organization are. And if you can align everything around your strategic priorities, everything else is downhill from there. If you know that you want to be, at the cutting edge and have some of these tools in place, and you can get agreement from the very top level,
Hmm.
that kind of cuts through any of the barriers that you have, because you're aligning your recommendations with some of the mission statements that you have for the organization. And then everything from there, we've established AI governance councils at both organizations that I'm at, and I sit on both of those. And they can, like I said, stakeholders from multiple parties, whether it's from the clinical side within imaging, we have subspecialty imaging representation if needed for even more expertise there. But we also review things that are for the entire clinical healthcare, AI governance. So we'll have people from other specialties, whether it's from primary care, specialty surgery, um, and other disciplines throughout, that are looking to bring tools to the group, but also represent, their own workflows and can speak to their challenges and how these tools may be able to assist them. And then bringing in the other counterparts from, from the legal side, making sure that, if we bring a vendor brings a contract, that we are doing our due diligence and aligning, what data practices we have with them and how the sharing is. And obviously bringing in some budget committees, because we need to know who's paying for this at the end of the day. Is this coming from, a high level budget? Is it from the department budget? And then, assessing whether there is a return on investment for these that is monetary. We kind of incorporate all of that in, and I think the governance councils can ingest all of that and consolidate that information so that it can be presented back to, whether it's a division that is making the decision, or it's the leadership that is driving this. It can be the governance council. I've seen that before in one of our groups, where we do kind of vote to recommend something.
Hmm.
And in some areas, that governance group can be the ultimate decision maker if it has all the correct stakeholders, on the call representative, and right there and ready to make those decisions and move it to the next phase. So I've seen both models. I think as long as you can align your main organization strategic priorities and how you want to move things forward, the governance council can serve directly for those goals, or be the point group that provides the rubber stamp that says, yes, we approve this, and here's our caveats, or here's our considerations for this, so that it can be moved to the next step, and keep things moving forward to stay on the cutting edge.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And it's just gotta, and we're not gonna get into sort of the perfect governance structure here, but things have to move forward, right? And you alluded to someone not being on the call. So, there's other thoughts there about, top level agreement. You mentioned top level agreement, executive sponsorship. So, and we don't have to get into all this, but this is where my mind goes. I go to specificity. Like,
Yeah.
we talk big picture stuff, but I want to know, like, okay, we want top level support. So we know that we can say the CEO is supporting these initiatives, but at what level do we need participation and attendance, right? So maybe you don't need the CEO to be on the committee. Maybe you do. Depends on the issue, depends on what the committee's for. But you do
Correct.
need somebody of seniority to be on the committee. And where is that level? And then how often are we meeting? What's our end goal? What's our timeline? Are we trying to make a decision by a certain point? And then who's got to be on these meetings? And we're talking about high level busy people. You can
Yeah.
assume if you have more than 5, 6, 7 people on a committee, you can almost guarantee one of them's not going to be able to make a meeting, right? Someone's
Yeah.
going to have something come up. Your doctors, your clinicians, your executives, and then, oh well, Sal and Larry can't make it today, so let's cancel the meeting. And okay, we'll try. Let's get 7 admins on the phone to reschedule it, and we're not moving forward. So I don't know. Am I crazy or is that like,
No, it happens. It
yeah,
happens. And this is all, it's funny, and we're talking about this around all around AI, but this has been, in healthcare, this type of problem has been there for ages, whether it's an AI tool or not. If
yeah,
someone is trying to bring a new solution to the organization, an IT solution, it gets vetted, it goes through this process, and then, it can take anywhere from, 6, 18, 24 months, right? Just to get it through governance of security review, contract, legal, back and forth. And by that time, the product has changed. The product, let's say you're trying to buy it, has changed, 3 times already. And so you're reevaluating again.
gotta go through again.
Exactly. So I think it's not a new problem to
Yeah,
AI. It just
yeah,
adds a different layer
yeah,
because, there are extra considerations to think about.
right.
But I think the whole governance problem has just been embedded with AI, with healthcare for so long. I think this is just another, with AI and, everyone trying to be on the cutting edge and putting this forefront. I think it's another opportunity for healthcare organizations to take a step back, look at their entire review process from
Right.
start to finish for
Yeah.
informatics and IT tools and say, hey, how can we just make this more efficient overall?
You can't be slow here because, as you said, you're gonna have people interviewing, you're gonna have people deciding where they wanna practice, and they're gonna say, "What do you mean you don't have this yet? What do you mean you don't have ambient documentation? What do you mean? Like,
Yeah,
are you serious?" And
yeah,
so you don't wanna be that health system because you can't get things moving because something's been in committee for 8 months, right? So
exactly.
all right, let me ask you another. Now, as I said, our readers would be, typically the C-suite, IT related executives in the health system. So CIO, CMIO, CNIO, CTO, CISO. There's a whole bunch now. Chief Data Officer, Chief
Right.
AI Officer. You got that. Talk about expanding titles, right? Um, so, um, my question to you is the relationship. I've always found that imaging is an interesting thing for these folks I'm talking about. Some are really tackling it, but I find it to be more the exception than the rule. Everybody's dealing with cyber security. Like everyone's in on that. Everyone's trying to make physicians happier. Everyone's trying to roll out ambient listening. Everyone's trying to do a little application rationalization, but not everyone is going all in on a sort of an enterprise imaging revamp. I think it's
Yeah,
like too big and too scary, and to a certain degree, I guess what's in place works, right? So things are working. We'd love enterprise imaging. We'd love for images to move all around the health system. We do
yeah,
know there's friction and pain points with, people walking around with discs and we can't read the disc, and we got couriers and people on bikes riding around town with discs. So
right.
we know there's a problem. We know there's a better way, but it seems to be such a massive, complex, multi-stakeholder problem that somehow a lot of health systems, is my gut feeling, feel like just let it be for now. I'm not ready to tackle that monster, but some
Yeah,
are. So I like your thoughts on that. And is it a monster that needs to be tackled? And if so, does that usually bubble up from folks like yourself? Does it ever get initiated as a concept or a area to work on from the CIO, the CMIO, I think the CMIO for sure. Um, and I'm interested in the relationship between those 2 camps, as it were, and how they can really work well together to improve what's going on in imaging. Go ahead.
Yeah, lots of thoughts there. I think a few things that come to mind are, yes, medical imaging used to be only radiology, and now you're in a state where we really think about it as enterprise imaging, right? So it's not just, radiology images from X-ray, CAT scan, MRI, ultrasound, that sort of thing. But now you have, cardiovascular imaging, heart and vascular, whether it's echo using MRI or CT, also for specific, cardiac imaging. You have all the imaging that occurs with specialty surgeries in the ORs, in the endoscopy suite. You have plain film imaging. Dermatology is taking, skin pictures, wound care imaging. These can all go to the same place and are under that same umbrella. Ophthalmology does imaging of the eyes. So all of this falls under that enterprise imaging strategy of how can we consolidate our systems, leverage that, together, especially first off within your own organization, right? To, eliminate as many, multiple third party, systems as you can, try to get it all under one roof to still maintain your clinical specialty and expertise, but maybe at the very least have them all in the same storage platform so that you can leverage, economies of scale, right? Lots of places are looking to do that in the cloud environment now, which is something that we're doing at both the Grady Health System and Emory Healthcare, where we're moving a lot of our imaging solutions and storage and archive to cloud solutions rather than on-prem for the redundancy, the scalability, and getting them all kind of in one place. Digital pathology is probably one of the biggest drivers for this, just because some of those digital slides and images under the microscope, they take up so much storage space that by the time you start scaling that to a whole practice for pathology, it becomes a huge burden to do that with on-prem storage.
Mhm.
That's one big driver, and I think that will resonate with a lot of the healthcare leaders is trying to consolidate, so that you're only maintaining, maybe a handful of specialty solutions, hopefully get things under one archive, or one other, so that you have one place to look at, one place to manage, and you can leverage that economies of scale and cost. And then you talked about interoperability, which is another, big elephant in the room. I think we've done a lot over the years to break down those barriers. We have lots of solutions for electronic image exchange, with the internet and, the way that we are interconnected now. We can, talk to other organizations, and there is ways to push images back and forth from one another. Some are automatic workflows, some require human tools, and sometimes we still do fallback. We always have the CD burners and the CD readers, at the institution as the fallback, from places that we're not connected to. But I think there's a good future ahead. We've done a lot of work to break down some of those barriers, so that we can get some of the automated pushes and pulls between the organization. Epic Health Systems has done a good job. Things like their Care Everywhere platform and other, statewide HIEs and exchange platforms for healthcare data are extending this out for patient matching with medical images. There's legislation coming down the pipeline that will, from the US government, that's going to ask for, imaging, at least the imaging links to be viewable to, and interoperable between organizations. And so I think all that's going to converge around, vendor solutions, healthcare systems, and from the regulatory side, opening up more doors and breaking down more barriers to say, hey, we need to get these, images, flowing, between the organizations more seamlessly in an electronic way, frictionless way, do patient matching in a better way so that, there's not, so we break down some of those silos and make sure that the patient's entire health record, including imaging and lab tests, are available, wherever they go for their care.
All right, that's great. Let me ask you one final question, then I'm gonna let you go. This has been great. Um, if you were talking to CIOs out there, um, and sort of giving them advice on engaging with imaging folks and trying to move the ball forward in this part of their organization, what would be who should how should they get started? Should they go try and partner with a specific title, a person? Is it a vision? They're not going to develop the vision on their own. They're going to need to develop it jointly with that individual and say, "Hey, listen, I think we could do a lot here. Help me understand. I want to help you move the ball forward. I know we need to do better image exchange. I want to know how I can support you. What would your advice be to the CIOs who want to start moving things in this area?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I would say is to make sure that you're fostering within the organization as much as you can those clinicians that are also jointly trained in informatics, whether you have someone that's homegrown within the institution or people that have done formal training. That can be specifically, there's imaging informatics fellowships out there. That's something that I took advantage of and did specific training before coming to Emory Healthcare and Grady Health System, and that has served me well. There's others within the groups that, they get into imaging informatics within their department and kind of grow organically within the team. And there's people who are doing clinical informatics dedicated fellowships that also incorporate some imaging informatics fundamentals there. So I think for the leaders to partner with a clinical lead like that would be immensely helpful so that they can kind of bridge the gap between the two spaces. And then in terms of, what sort of strategic priorities to tackle, I think it's a partnership between um, the leadership, the operational team for the radiology department, as well as the clinical staff and team. Radiology is very unique in the sense that it does touch every, aspect of the organization, right? What used to be in medical healthcare, something, some procedures or, points of healthcare are kind of a luxury. Medical imaging is a necessity nowadays. You don't step into, the emergency department and an outpatient practice to do a surgery before someone does some sort of imaging to help them
Mhm.
out or help guide some clinical decisions. So it's really a bedrock of what we're doing now, and the volumes have increased so much that it's a staple of every organization to have that accessibility and ability to provide medical imaging services. So partnering with your all those stakeholders is really important to see in your organization what's important to you, or where are your opportunities for improvement. Is it, patient access? Is it, how can we leverage our current, modalities to scan more patients? We have a backlog of, 6, 8 weeks, months, to get patients in with outstanding orders. How can we make our, scanners more efficient, make sure we're optimizing our practices there? Maybe it is about clinical efficiency. Are we not, having turnaround times are long because the volume is piled up? Is it purely staffing, or is it really down to, our IT practices, working the right way? Are images, loading quick enough? Do we have a workforce that is, using the right tools that they can access on the fly on their stations? Are we leveraging remote work now because we have radiologists that are, on-prem, but also now growing there's a remote workforce. So is our IT infrastructure redundant and resilient enough to, sustain that so that we can continue our growth? And then, to sort of bring it all full circle, we talked about AI at the beginning for a long period of time. Are we taking advantage of the tools that are out there? Like I said, a lot of the tools that we're seeing can increase efficiency. But on the flip side, maybe an organization has put out an AI tool that is maybe bogging down their workflow.
Yeah.
It's delaying images getting to the workstation, or maybe causing more confusion, or delaying some of the reports that are going out there because it's just adding more time and more things to interpret for the radiologist. So are we really dialing that in and making it, as seamless as possible so that ultimately at the end you're getting a clear, concise report back to the clinicians and the patients for streamlined care?
Well, that's great, Dr. Kikano. I'm glad to bring your voice to our readers. This is an area that's too big to ignore. It's too big for CIOs to not have on their top 3, 4 major strategic priorities. So I appreciate your time. I think it's going to be quite helpful, and I hope I can catch up with you down the road. Have a
Anytime. It's a
wonderful day.
pleasure. Thank you,
Thank
Anthony.
you. All right. Bye
All the
bye.
best.